My parents have owned a tavern/restaurant for 14 years in my small town. My father is someone who likes to start new projects and is a well-known person in our town. One day he was contacted by the local realtor to offer my father a private showing of a historical hotel that had been up for sale. This hotel has been around for decades and went from hotel to restaurant to bar with little success. Everyone who had owned it before put it back on the market within a year. The bank had the title now, and the realtor told my father, if you don't plan to buy it and fix it up, they're going to rip it down. A lot of people in the town thought that the only person who could save it was my father, so he bought the hotel. My parents kept the downstairs bar and renovated the upstairs for apartments. This is when odd things started to happen. My father would come home almost every night with the camera footage to show my mom and I. The footage always showed an empty pool room with small, random orbs floating in the foreground. My father is a believer in the paranormal, but my mother is not, so her and I both chalked it up to bugs and dust. Although I will agree, the way the orbs zigzagged around the room was weird, but it still seemed like nothing. A month goes by and my father comes home early on a Sunday from working down at the hotel. He walked into the house, looking spooked. Something my father rarely ever is. He detailed out how he was behind the bar, checking on receipts from the night before, when he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway entrance. We don't open on Sunday, but if someone my dad knew saw his truck in the parking lot, they would just walk in to see him. So he didn't find the footsteps odd at all. Without looking up from his receipts, he called out, "We're not open, but give me a sec." He heard the footsteps enter the bar room and take 6 more steps toward him before stopping. Taking another second to finish going over the last night's shift, he looked up and peered around the wooden support beam, and there was no one. He said he got out of there so fast, he doesn't even remember locking the door behind him. My mom obviously thinks he's crazy, but I am freaked. That place always gave me the creeps, but my father confirming my fears made me want to never step foot in that building again. 2 days ago, my mom had an experience there that sent her out the door faster than my dad. She was in the bar room before opening hours collecting the shift money from the night before. She wasn't there for more than 5 minutes before she started to hear the faint sound of music coming from the entrance hallway. She said she ignored it for a while, assuming it was one of the tenants upstairs. After collecting the money, she went to leave and the music started getting louder. She said it sounded like old waltz music, piano-based, and that it was clear as day. The further she walked down the hall toward the bedrooms, the more prominent the noise became. As she stepped in front of the women's restroom, she said it sounded like someone was in there playing the music on their phone. By this time, my mom was sufficiently freaked out and ran out of rational reasoning behind what it could be. Just as she was about to open the door, she said she heard the water turn on and off twice before she left the building. In the parking lot, she called my dad to come down, certain that someone had been in there with her. But when he came to check it out, no one was there. Now my mom is a believer, and we are both properly terrified of that creepy old hotel. I want to start this off by saying that I only talk about this because it's part of my healing process and helps me to deal with the trauma of losing my infant son. In 2007, I was 9 months pregnant with my last child. I had had preeclampsia with previous pregnancies and a placenta abruption with a pregnancy 7 years prior, so I was being monitored very closely. Not as closely as I should have been, but that's another story for another time. The evening of December 12th, I became ill. I felt dreadful, and looked at my abdomen and thought that it looked rigid and strange. Instantly, I knew that I was dying. I can't explain it, but simultaneously I heard a whisper in my left ear, a soft, gentle whisper that said, "The baby has died." I instantly thought I was losing my mind, and yelled at my son to call 911. We were in the middle of a winter storm, so our phones were dead. I finally got a neighbor to call my husband, who took me to the maternity ward of a large hospital. One of the most experienced nurses happened to be on duty, thank goodness, because I coded when I got to the floor. I'd had a 3rd-degree abruption. 4th degree is death. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had to go on dialysis for a while. My ammonia levels were high, so for quite a bit I thought that I had given birth. I did get to hold him. He was beautiful, with dark curls. When I got to the medical surgery floor, I was coherent and trying to come to grips about why this had happened to me. One night, I had awoken to voices. I thought it was my family in my room. My eyes were closed, but I was awake and heard what sounded like 20 people talking to me. I was lying there, trying to understand what they were saying about me, but all the people were talking so fast and in a hushed tone. I opened my eyes to find no one there. Not one soul. What scared me was that as I opened my eyes, one person said, "Shh." A second person said, "Shh." Then there was a collective shh. I was terrified, in a dark room with the door shut, and I had a hard time moving around because of my emergency C-section incision. I started calling for my husband. He didn't answer. He would often sleep on the floor, beside my bed on a pull-out sofa chair. Suddenly, a small olive-toned girl of 6 or 7 appeared beside my bed. She had 2 curly ponytails, and was dressed in 1970s type clothing. I could not see her eyes, just dark shadows. She pointed to the other side of my bed and said, "He's over there." My husband had been on the left side of my hospital bed and was asleep. I turned back to face her, and she was gone. Having that experience in the hospital helped change my insight about death. I know that I will see my infant son again one day. I also think that the people's voices I heard may have been people that had passed away at that hospital, as well as the little girl. I felt no threat at all, but was frightened because this was so unexpected. Happy Valentine's Day weekend to everyone. Not a lot of romance happening in the Gribble House, but we did have a lot of action. On Sunday evening this past week, a pair of childhood friends named Katie and Lauren investigated with us. The 2 girls had a mutual friend that had passed away when they were kids, named Lauren. As they investigated, they could hear her name being said through the ghost box. Several times in a row, and all over the warehouse. The girls told our lead investigator, Kelly, that she had been to see a psychic in the past and had been told that her deceased friend Lauren was definitely with her. Another group investigating on Sunday night were using the Ovilus on dictionary mode, and they had both the Ovilus and the spirit box say, "Save her," twice in a row. While Kelly was seated in the slave quarters with several guests who were investigating, they heard from a spirit named Anthony and his wife, as well as a child spirit named Will. Tuesday night was great as well. The ghost box and ghost meters were the star of the show that night. A ton of different names came through, like Adam, Helen, Tom, Meredith, and of course, Paul. Paul was his regular charming self, and called one of the investigators as Fat Ass. One of the women investigating asked, "Why would you say such a thing?" To which she got the response of his laughter through the ghost box. Paul was fairly cooperative that night, actively communicating through the ghost box with several groups of guests. However, when they requested that he do things like touch their hands or move the EMF detectors, his response was simply no. We got some amazing EVPs that night through the ghost boxes. One group investigating asked a spirit if they were nice, to which they got the response, "What do you want?" Another group got a sinister response from their questions. They asked a spirit named Tom, who told them that he was the one who killed Meredith and the lady by the door. The investigation on Friday night went great as well. Orbs were everywhere, as well as EMF and ghost meter action. Don't forget about the Raggedy Ann doll. Several times during the evening, she lit up from head to toe, not just the hands or feet separately. One man investigating told a female spirit that he was communicating with that if anything or anyone decided to follow him home that evening, that he would be very ticked off. The only response that he got to that was laughter through the ghost box, along with the word clown. Another group was using the spirit box, and ended up conversing with a soldier from the Revolutionary War who answered questions about the battle through the ghost meter. The battle was the Siege of Savannah. A few children were heard from Friday night as well. One little box told the investigators that his name was Leo. When they said goodbye to Leo for the night, the right hand of the Raggedy Ann doll lit up. Over near the residual haunting area, they could hear children's giggles through the spirit box. When Kelly was leaving the warehouse for the night, she thought that she could see an older man standing inside the gated area of the Gribble House. Needless to say, she left with chills that evening. Last night, on Valentine's Day, we had 2 separate investigations. During the first, the Raggedy Ann doll had some very interesting action. While seated in the slave quarters, everyone investigating was focused on the doll, just as the doll moved all on its own. A little child named Wendy was heard from the spirit box in the slave quarters as well, and the REM pod lit up with small touches. As the guests were leaving the warehouse from the first hour, a few of them were looking back into the building and swore that they saw 2 women entering the area by the bathroom, but no one was there. During the second investigation, a group of 2 saw a black shadow figure moving along the Gribble House walls, accompanied by a dramatic drop in temperature, as well as whispers and strange noises. Yet another great week of investigation at the Gribble House Paranormal Experience. Setting: hospital, medical surgery floor. Profession: staff nurse. This happened yesterday, and I have 2 nursing students as living proof. We basically carry those indestructible Nokia cell phones around at work. If you hit the call bell, they ring to the aide's phone first, then it bounces to my phone. Yesterday, a call bell came in from an all-female room. My phone put itself on speakerphone and answered itself. A male voice repeated on a loop with a 4 to 5 second delay, "Are you there?" At the time, I was giving a report to 2 nursing students, 1 male, 1 female. The incident happened after we had just started talking about near-death experiences. We all went white and got goosebumps. The female student said, "Well, you're haunted." It was unbelievable. The male student calmly said, "Yes, we are here." This had never happened before. Those phones don't repeat. Absolutely amazing. I went into the room later and opened the window and told him he was dead and that he needed to move on. What an experience for the students. This has never happened to me before, but I hope it happens again, and that I have the courage to do what the male student did. I'll let you decide whether or not she was really a vampire. Either way, I promise that this is a true story. It happened around December 2017. I had just finished high school, and one of my friends was hosting a house party. It was out in the country, large property, lovely view. It was a great place to celebrate the end of exams. I recognized a lot of people there and knew them quite well. However, there were 2 guests I didn't recognize, a boy and a girl. He was a stoic character with a solid build. Not quite muscle, not quite fat. Not quite someone that you would want to annoy. She was a thin figure with long amber hair and fair skin. He would scan the crowds while she shyly cradled a bottle. No one else was paying any attention to them, and I could tell they felt uncomfortable. They seemed nice enough, so I grabbed a friend and walked over to them, hoping that I could put them at ease. My friend left pretty quickly, but the girl seemed relieved that I was paying attention to them. She told me her name was Verity. Bit of an unusual name, but I thought it was pretty. Her boyfriend seemed a bit more comfortable too, but he didn't say much. I don't recall his name. Verity and I chatted for a while, but I was quickly running out of small talk. I asked her about the alcohol she was drinking and what kind she prefers, that sort of thing. She replied casually, it's okay, but my favorite substance is blood. I think that's a good cue to run away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I asked her why she enjoyed the taste of blood. I've cut my lip before, and I remember the taste being quite sour. She told me that the flavor is dependent on a person's health. The healthier they are, the sweeter their blood. It suddenly made sense as to why her boyfriend was built like an athlete. She taught me a few weird things about hematology, and was very knowledgeable about medieval execution methods. She explained them with a strange fondness. It was almost nostalgia. I only knew the Viking blood eagle, but that was enough to get her excited. We ended up talking all night. I listened to her gore-filled lectures, and they both listened to me as well. Even though my interests in stories were much less interesting in comparison, they didn't seem to mind. They smiled and encouraged me. In between subjects, Verity would draw some blood from her boyfriend, either with her nails or her fangs. He seemed okay with it. I talked to her boyfriend for a short while, too. We got along just fine, but we had very little in common, so it was a bit tricky to hold a conversation. He was into sports and cars, so he was probably human. After a while, I tried to encourage them to meet my friends. Verity, however, didn't like that. She was very possessive and insisted that I stay with them all night. I wasn't in the mood to argue with a bloodthirsty historian, and she was being very friendly with me, so I agreed. She didn't bite me once, and I'm grateful her boyfriend was there to feed her. Maybe she was a vampire, or maybe she just had some really weird habits. Either way, I hope you enjoyed my story. When I was in high school, I lived in a really small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related or hated each other. I had no family tree there, so yeah. But I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just petty harassment and occasional fights, but it had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. Just better to avoid trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store for a movie and went to the Dairy Queen for some ice cream, and then headed home. Now she lives in the complete boonies, out in the middle of the woods along a long, lonely road with no streetlights. We're chatting, eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. What was a very big deal was that when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, I saw two hands on the back seat and a head coming from the hatchback part of the vehicle. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife, which was the only thing I had. She saw me and asked what was wrong. Loudly, I said, "Nothing, I just have to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was crap. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to jump out too. She popped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. This guy popped up like a jack-in-the-box, with empty hands waving around saying, Hey, what are y'all up to tonight?" It was some strange kid from our high school who we had never in our entire lives spoken to before. Ever. I said, "What in the holy hell are you doing in our car?" His reply was, "I thought you guys were going to the dance and I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway, so whatever he was planning was totally forgotten. We actually ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he's telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, no. We dropped his ass off and noped out of there as soon as we could. After he got out of the car, my girlfriend started crying and shaking. She was so freaked out. I have no idea what he was trying to do when the lights caught him crawling out of that hatchback. I hated that high school. This story is from 2013. I travel a lot for work. I mean, before COVID. And when I do, I stay at hotels. Sleeping in a different bed doesn't bother me, as I'm mostly a sound sleeper, and I'm used to it given that I've been doing this for a while. This was a hotel in the suburbs of Chicago. From the time I checked into the room, I think it was room number 413, I have never felt such a sense of dread, despair, and claustrophobia. I am a rational person, no history of depression or mental illness, so I explained it to myself that maybe the 13 in the room number was messing with my head. But I've stayed in other hotel rooms with a 13 in my assigned room number. I had also stayed at the same property every week over the last few months, but I had never felt this way. I pondered while lying in bed if I should call the front desk and ask for another room. I didn't know what excuse that I would give to them. Everything was great with the room. The shower was fine, the room was spotless, the toilet had no issues. It was a boring, predictable, clinically consistent room like any other Marriott property. No complaints on the Wi-Fi. I couldn't bring myself to lie to the front desk and ask to be changed to another room. So I told myself I was a rational man, a husband, a father, and a protector. I decided that I was going to stay put. The uneasiness didn't lessen, so I turned on every light in the room, took out all the Bibles from the bedstands, and set them next to me. I am not of the Christian faith, and not very religious either, but I felt like I needed all the protection I could get. So I played chants on loop on YouTube from my own religion all night at low volume until I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, worked out, showered, and went to work. The night's experience felt like a fleeting memory during the day. I had a really fun rental that week, a Mustang GT, and it was so much fun the night's memory almost felt imaginary entirely. I came back from work that evening feeling a little silly about the night before, and went back to the room. In an instant, the same sense of unexplained dread and claustrophobia came flooding back. I just couldn't rationally explain it. So I went back to the routine from the night before. Lights on, chanting, Bible, Marriott Mormon Bible, all by the bed. Next evening, I spoke with the bartender and asked him if he had heard any weird complaints. He said he hadn't, but he'd ask around. When I came back the next week, I got a different room, but I checked in with the bartender. He said he had done a little digging over the weekend and picked up on gossip from the other hotel staff that some of the cleaning ladies didn't like that room and even that corner of the 4th floor. He was intrigued enough that he brought along a sensitive friend of his from his Episcopalian church and said that when she opened the door and had barely taken a step inside that she just made a 180-degree turn and came right back out. She couldn't even go inside. and said that it felt heavy. The bartender said that it was enough to spook him. He said he just stood in the corridor and refused to go in after that. We kinda had a laugh about it and figured that we would Google the property address to see if there were documented murders or suicides, but there was nothing. The property changed hands a few times. There was a nearby fire with some deaths, but nothing notable as far as Google search goes. I didn't think much of it, but I have stayed more than 2,000 nights in hotels since the fall of 2013, and I have yet to experience that fear ever. I continue to rethink about the memory of my experience, trying to recount the details about the room, the week, maybe the mood at work, just so I could find something rational to explain what I had felt, and I have been unable to. I've gathered a few paranormal encrypted stories after moving to North Carolina. The silver UFO, the shadow person, the six lights, etc. But this one stuck out to me the most. I've never even heard of this thing or even knew that this thing existed, and I was a kid when I saw it. It could be my mind exaggerating, but another person with me saw it, and it freaked us both out. We were driving along the back roads of North Carolina and learning the shortcuts and ways to get around as we had just moved here. It was the evening, and it was around false summertime, the time where it's hot randomly in the spring, so the windows were rolled down. We were just having fun cruising and sightseeing. The other person with me was driving and was chit-chatting to me about the smells and plants that I should stay away from. We were passing a cow farm, so we rolled up our windows, and the curve past the farm was coming up, so we rolled them back down. Now after you hit this curve, there's a hill and it flattens out into a straight but crummy road. In the middle of the road, something blackish was walking. It was shaggy, and was just walking all calm as if it was sightseeing too. I remember my friend asking, "What's this dog doing?" It looked as big as a black bear or a derpy St. Bernard, and it walked with a normal stride. We slowly crept up on it, hoping that it would hear the car and move out of the way, but it didn't. So my friend gave the horn a little tap, and this thing finally turned around. Its eyes were reflected from the headlights. It hunched down and hissed. When it turned, its tail lifted, and it was long and black. It then darted off into the woods. My friend was puzzled. I just sat there in disbelief at what I had just witnessed. It was an odd and quiet ride back home. Fast forward to more than a decade later, me and a few friends were looking at local urban legends because one of them swore up and down that they saw the ghost that everyone was talking about and wanted to know more about it. I'm zoning out because I'm an introvert, and went looking around in the website that we found. I see this title called The Vampire Beast of North Carolina and was like, what the hell? North Carolina's got a hillbilly vampire? I click on it and read. Some beast was terrorizing locals and their farm animals, leaving puncture wounds, no blood, and leaving the body there. Multiple bodies of dead animals in one night, all dead the same way. I scoffed and say, El Chupacabra, like Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, and kept scrolling. I read some more and saw, here's what witnesses recount seeing, and when I scrolled down to see a hand-drawn picture of it, I nearly shat bricks. The photo the eyewitnesses had drawn of what they saw looked exactly like what I had seen over a decade ago. The shape, the tail, the color. I went pale and exited out of the page and just sat there thinking on my life's existence up to this point, wondering if I had some sort of brain damage, because I was like, there's no way that this can be real, what I saw. But what really hit the nail on the coffin was that this thing was attacking people's farm animals, and I had seen this thing by a cow farm. I haven't seen this beast again. I really don't want to because I think it's a bad omen since I have a superstitious family, which is why I think paranormal and odd occurrences happen to us. Whenever we do have odd experiences, we don't speak about it to each other. I work in a hospital that's run by the Sisters of a Catholic convent. This hospital is pretty old, set almost in the early 1910s. Needless to say, quite a few buildings on the campus are ancient and eerie. No feet. I had night duty a few days back, and since there weren't any patients to attend to, I went to sleep in the room assigned to me in the emergency room itself. A few minutes in, I felt extremely cold. It was the peak of summer and this coolness just didn't feel right. I got up, switched on the lights, and went out calling the nursing staff. I told them I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in there tonight. They were more than happy to entertain me for the rest of the evening. One of the staff is a dear friend, and she asked if I wanted to hear a ghost story. I jumped in because now we were a crowd, and there was no reason to be afraid. She told me about this incident in the baby ward. It was the middle of the night. A mother walked up to the nurse's station requesting for a bowl to feed her child. One of the nurses noted down the details, mother's and baby's name, and handed over the bowl. A few seconds later, the same nurse happened to look back and saw that the woman had no feet and was floating away in the air. She pointed to the other sister as well. After recovering from what they had seen, the nurse fired up the system to check the patient's name, and to their surprise, the discharge summary by the baby and mother's name showed up. The mother had died of postpartum hemorrhage after delivering a premature baby, and the baby too had passed away a few days later due to some neonatal infection. C floor. This floor consists of private wards and is pretty posh. There's a call switch for each ward which the patient rings in case they need something, and the bell sounds in the nurse's station. One of my usual nightly duties, I was typing a discharge summary when the bell to Ward 7 rang. The nurses were on break and seemed to not hear it. My senior asked me to go check on it in case it was our patient. I got up and walked through the dark corridor in search of room 7, which was at the end of the hallway. The lights were off, and it seemed like whoever was inside was sleeping. I knocked, but nobody responded. A strange sense of fear crept through me. I ran. I reached the nurse's station. My senior looked up to see me breathing heavily. He asked if I was all right. I told him that the room was dark, and that no one opened at the door when I knocked. The nurses walked in at the same time and told me that there was no one admitted in Ward 7 and that the bell often rang like that. They wouldn't react unless someone was admitted. SICU bed number 1. The curious case about this bed is that no matter who ends up on it, eventually dies, no matter how young or healthy that the patient is. The incidents have been pretty unnatural over the past few months, and there's no scientific explanation. Just a few days back, a 22-year-old boy was admitted for gallbladder surgery, was shifted to SICU after surgery, and a few hours after shifting, he developed breathlessness and died before intubation. Doctors usually do not like their patients to be assigned to this bed. Even if the SICU is full, as soon as a bed vacates, a patient from number 1 immediately gets assigned a number 2 bed. There's no backstory about this. At least, not that I'm aware of. Myself and a few friends go on a road trip every summer to visit haunted places. In 2018, we stayed at a haunted hotel in the Northeastern United States and had to sign a safety waiver just to stay there. It was a small country hotel, and the only other party had canceled, so we had the place to ourselves with our tour guide. We had a spirit box type of device, which I've been skeptical of, but we all carried on conversations. There was a moment where I heard my name through the box, when I had never said my name, and even said my full name. I prefer a shortened version. We spent a lot of time upstairs in a room where the quote-unquote ladies of the night would sleep, and I was prohibited from sitting on the bed by a spirit that was allegedly the ladies' bodyguard. I sat down only for a few seconds, and as soon as I stood, the bed lifted up and dropped, scaring the hell out of me, and at least one of my friends witnessed this. We went upstairs to an unfinished floor that was under renovation. There was an old ornate chair that was used by a notorious Irish mafia hitman that stayed at the hotel frequently. We went in a circle saying our names to see if the spirit, Joe, would let one of us sit in the chair. I said mine, and a light that we were using started to flicker like crazy. This is especially odd because I have red hair, and as far as I know, I was the only one in our group of Irish descent. Our guide asked if he was sure that he wanted me to sit there, and he replied, "F yeah," through the box. I took the invitation and sat in the chair, and oddly enough, I felt some kind of strange power surge through me. I eventually stood and thanked Joe, and from the spirit box I heard, "You're welcome." Later that night is when the real event happened. Our guide said, "Now, I don't normally do this, but since there are only 4 of you, I'd like to take you down to the morgue." It wasn't so much of a morgue, but it was stone walls and a dirt floor, and it was cold as hell. We were in a corner of the room when our guide said, "I don't want to scare you, but there's something standing right behind you." I saw a shadow on the wall, but it was cast by my friend B. That's when B moved to the side, and there was another shadow underneath his. It was taller than anyone in the room, and gave off an intimidating presence. I looked back, and saw no one standing in front of the light source, and when I looked back again, there was no shadow. I've always been skeptical, but believed in the supernatural to a degree. Believe me when I say that basement had something seriously dark down there. Something evil. I have never felt so vulnerable in my life. The whole night we felt like we were being watched, and could hear footsteps around the hotel. I'd love to go back and get some more evidence someday. I've done paranormal investigations for a few years now, but that one night stay at that hotel was enough to completely convince me. There is definitely something beyond death, and perhaps the most terrifying part, not everything on that side is friendly. Back in the winter of 2019, my partner and I had settled into a hotel for a few days before going on vacation elsewhere. I am somewhat sensitive. I've never seen a full-body apparition in reality, and never had any physical paranormal happenings up until this point, either. I've only ever felt feelings in environments. This hotel room was no different. Upon entering the room, I felt a sense of calm when stepping inside. However, there was also a sense of curiosity. I felt as if something was watching my partner and I. Over time, this feeling became more comfortable, to put it lightly. Over the course of the next few days, different feelings became more noticeable by the minute. Most of the feelings consisted of being watched. Eventually, I asked my partner on our second day there, "Hey, do you feel anything off about this room?" To this they responded, "No." Whatever was watching us noticed that I noticed them. That's when the experience turned from lingering to dark. Later that night in bed, I had a normal dream. I don't remember most of it, other than maybe one image of running curiously through a black hall of mirrors. Suddenly, as if I had blinked, I saw the hotel bed, my partner and I, sleeping. We were laying away from each other, but there was a mass between us. A dark mass. It leaned in closer to me, and I felt what can only be described as a light body pressure on my back and arm as it held around my torso. The thing spoke to me in my sleep, more specifically in my mind. It had a male voice, but took on the voice of a mixture of my partner and my first ex-partner. It casually threatened that it was going to hurt my partner. I couldn't move, and my perspective was going back and forth from my own perspective of laying on one side of the bed to seeing a bird's eye view of the bed. I wasn't lucid enough to tell it to go away, but did have enough control to ask why, and to say, "Don't hurt us." It then responded, "I don't want to hurt you, but I want to hurt your partner, and I'm going to." I kept telling it not to better not to leave us alone. Then it threatened to hurt me as well. I could feel its intent, so I stopped responding. To my silence it replied, "Good. Be glad that I'm not hurting you, but your partner is going to hurt. Right about now." As soon as it said now, I jolted awake to the sound of my partner's blood-curdling scream. My partner's leg had developed a Charlie horse cramp in their sleep at the same time that the spirit had spoken its statement. I could still feel the spirit's energy upon wakening, and one thought popped into my head. I told you. The next morning, we packed our bags for the vacation. I could feel whatever had tormented my partner the other night, watching us leave. I told my partner about the incident, and they jokingly told me not to sick any demons on them. But they did believe me. I've never had a spirit contact me so directly in my life before this. That spirit did not attach to me, surprisingly. It stayed in the hotel room, and it's unlikely that I'll ever go back there again.
In 2001, I was big into ghost hunting. I was looking online for a haunted weekend road trip destination and came across the Jefferson Hotel in Jefferson, Texas. About the only thing it said was that room 19 was quote-unquote uninhabitable. Now that really piqued my interest, so I called them up and asked if it was true. The lady at the front desk laughed and just said no, we book that room all the time. So I reserved it. I was so excited, but didn't really think that anything would happen. I'd been to several supposedly haunted hotels and B&Bs and had no results. Now, I'm not sensitive like some people. I always hear people say, "I felt like someone was watching me." I have no idea what that means. The only thing I noticed when I walked in the room was a faint, musky smell of an old-fashioned perfume. I set up a recorder in the room and headed out to explore the town. It was like going back in time. If you live in Texas and are looking for a road trip, I highly recommend Jefferson. When I got back to the room, I turned off the recorder and looked out its one window to see a large bust of Thomas Jefferson in the courtyard. I then sat down on the bed to relax and watch some TV. After a bit, something caused me to look back up at the window, and I saw something. A red smudge on the glass. I frowned and got up to see what it was. I hadn't noticed any red smudges earlier. I looked closely. It was more like a streak of red in a greasy substance of some sort. Then I noticed more streaks, and then more. I gradually began to realize that these were letters. My heart began to race as I backed up to take it all in. These streaks of red were spelling out, "Help me." I kind of just collapsed on the bed, my heart still racing. I knew without a doubt in my mind that those letters were not there 15 minutes earlier. I just sat in disbelief for about 5 minutes. Needless to say, there was not much sleep to be had that night. As I left the hotel the next morning, I was disappointed to see that there was no one behind the desk. I really needed to talk to someone. I left a note about the writing and said that I would call them on Monday. When I called, I told the woman who answered who I was, and she said, "Hold on just a moment." She put the housekeeping lady on the phone. I asked, "Did you see it?" She said, "Yes, I saw it." And then she said, "Just before you arrived, I raised the blinds and turned on the AC. There was no writing. And the strangest thing was when I attempted to clean it off. She said that it was like the letters had been engraved into the glass. I told her that I was freaked out, and she confirmed that she was too. By the way, on the way home I listened to the tape that I had had running in the room while I was gone. What I heard was the sound of the closet door angrily slamming several times and something shuffling around. But what really got to me was the sound of a woman sobbing.
About 2 years ago, I was going shopping for a Valentine's Day gift for my girlfriend. It's about a 5 to 10 minute walk to the store from where I live. It was around 8 p.m. and I just wanted to get home. I was walking in the road because there's next to no cars going down the road, and I didn't feel like going through the park. I was approaching the park when I realized that I was being followed. I thought nothing of it at first, so I just kept walking. He then got closer and closer, and when I was walking past, I hear a, "Hey kid." I was shocked, but I wanted to ignore him, so I kept going. Then he said it again, a bit more violently. So I turned around, and this guy was within reach of me. I'm 6'1", and this man was a bit taller. He then tried to set up a conversation like, "How's your night?" I felt a bit relieved, and kinda thought poorly of myself for judging him too soon. But I was right in my assumptions. He then tried to keep a conversation going and proceeded to ask me where I was headed. I just told him that I was going to the store. He then walked up to a car and said, "I can give you a ride." I said, "No thanks, I can walk from here." He kept asking that same question, and then he said, "What about car surfing?" And then he tried to show me what it was. I still declined. This guy was really creeping me out. I was still walking down the road while this was happening. He followed me still, and thankfully I was reaching the store, so he left me alone. But not for long. I got the candy heart chocolate box and a teddy bear, and was walking back home when I saw the guy again. The weird part is that he was following me from the other side. I feel like he waited for me just to come walking by again. This was starting to scare me. He then yelled at me again, and I was terrified. I was hesitant, but I turned around. Now he was starting to jog his way over to me. Then I noticed something off. The car was gone, meaning that this guy had either walked here or he wasn't alone. I acted oblivious, like I didn't notice that the car was gone. He tried starting another conversation. I was really uncomfortable, so I just said, "I really need to get back," and I started walking faster toward the fastest route home, which is through an alley. When I was going through, he was gone, and I was thankful. But when I was walking down the alley, I don't know what it was, but I saw the same car that he was claiming as his own. When I got home, I wanted to know more about this guy. I looked online for something about him and there was nothing, of course. I wanted to know about the car. I didn't believe for a second that it was his, so I looked it up, and it was reported as stolen. I reported it just in case. I'm not sure if they ever found it, or ever found the guy in general. I just hope that I never have to deal with him again.
About 11 years ago, a group of friends and myself drove to Mineral Wells, Texas for a spontaneous midnight exploration of the long-abandoned and supposedly haunted Baker's Hotel. It was incredibly creepy inside. The place was pitch black and littered with old pieces of dusty, moldy furniture and decor from the 50s and 60s, whenever it was last operating. The first thing that freaked us out was that it sounded like the building was breathing. And loudly. Turned out it was just flooding in the basement that was echoing through the elevator shafts. Anyways, we started exploring everywhere. By the time we got to the 7th floor, we were a little disappointed that nothing weird had happened yet. The adrenaline was kinda wearing off.
We started walking down this long hallway on the 7th floor, peeking into various rooms and peering around with our flashlights. All of a sudden we heard a door, coming from the end of the hallway we were moving toward, slowly open and then slowly close. It was creaking very loudly, just like in a scary movie. It scared us, and we froze. We were close enough that our flashlights reached the door in question. It was some kind of small, weird door, framed inside of a larger, regular door. My friend wanted to turn around and leave. We thought maybe there was a homeless person in there, and they were trying to scare us off. Nonetheless, I convinced him to keep going because I had to go in the room now. We started walking slowly toward the door, all the while saying stuff out loud like, "We're just exploring, if someone's in there, we're just messing around," things like that. We were probably about 15-ish feet away when the door suddenly began opening again, eerily and slowly like before. However, this time it slammed shut, right in front of our eyes. Again, we were scared frozen. Again, I insisted that we keep going. A minute or so later, we worked up the courage and just barged right in that door as fast as we could. What was in there? Absolutely nothing. There was no possible explanation for whatever had opened and closed and then slammed that door. There were no cracked windows allowing for the airflow from outside. There was nothing. We shut the door behind us and sat down in nervous disbelief, and then chain smoked a couple of cigarettes each. We finally left and actually went through the rest of the building. Myself, my younger cousin, and a couple of friends stayed recently at one of the most haunted places in Texas and America. As a kid, I had heard stories of this old hotel and the dark history behind it. In recent years, a few paranormal shows showcased and did some investigations there. When I saw in our local news that the Magnolia Hotel was opening back up for visitors to stay the night, I was stoked. When you stay the night, you get 2 rooms, regardless of whether you're staying by yourself or you're bringing company. Also, you get the whole 2nd story to yourself for you to investigate. There is a door that separates the hotel, updated, side and the haunted rooms side. To be fair, the rooms that you stay in are haunted as well. The entire hotel is haunted. Needless to say, I recorded so much activity on tape and in person in my own experiences. The findings I have will raise the hairs on your body. I was hearing voices, seeing shadows, hearing footsteps, showing the EVP sessions and hearing our names. I actually got touched twice, and the 2nd time was so chilling. We were outside of this room that had a ton of activity. My friend had the dowsing rods. She asked if there was a spirit, and 3 times it pointed directly at me. She asked if the spirit was next to me. The rods said no. She asked if it was behind me, and they said yes. At that moment, I felt someone grab my right shoulder and slowly move their hand down my back. I got cold chills and felt tingling and numbing for a good few minutes. I am planning to go back very soon. I am a sensitive. I attract ghosts, and I go ghost hunting quite a bit. I have other experiences from several places that are extremely haunted here in Texas and in other states as well. I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie, Pennsylvania. I worked night shift. I'm a travel RN, so this was one of the hospitals that I traveled to. One night my floor was slow, so I got pulled down to the CCU to work. Well, that night my patient rang her call bell at 3 o'clock in the morning and she asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner," and she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, "Who, Ashley?" That was the nurse I was working with, and I pointed to her because she was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer, and the woman says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just us two. And FYI, the patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have any history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate. I kind of laughed, and I was like, "It's just us." And she just stares at me, so I say, "Okay, if she does it again, just yell for me and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front of the nurse station. About half an hour goes by, and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking. I hear the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little light. I walk in and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There's no one else in here." She says, "No, she went in the bathroom." I open the door and the lights are still on, but no one is in there. Looking confused, I say, "What does she look like?" Because I thought that someone was messing around. "It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark that I can't really make her face out." When she says that, I get a little weirded out. But the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before, this time a man in his early 60s in the patient room. Nice guy, alert and oriented and very polite. Night is going good. It's about 3 a.m. and his call light goes off, which means he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "You are my nurse, right?" And I nod my head. And he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in that corner? What is she doing?" What? I almost crapped my pants instantly. This was 3 months later. Same room, same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs, and I say, "You're not the first person to say that." I started telling everyone about it, and then I find out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in the 1990s, a nurse who worked there committed suicide. She shot herself to death in the second floor bathroom. I, a 23-year-old female, just wanted to share what I would call my first real encounter. Even as a lifelong skeptic, I can't explain this. If you're familiar with U.S. ghost hunting spots, you might have heard of the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona. It has been open since 1902 and has been the subject of multiple paranormal investigations and shows, and there are supposedly 3 documented ghosts who inhabit it. That of a drowned child, a man in a top hat, and a forlorn prostitute. My boyfriend and I decided on Saturday morning that we would take a trip to make up for a missed birthday. We had never gone on a real trip together, so we didn't plan it well at all. We just realized that we were about an hour and a half from Bisbee and decided to book a hotel once we got there. We chose the Copper Queen because it was the most prominent hotel in the area and is right in the middle of everything. We weren't aware of its reputation as a paranormal hotspot. The room itself was antique-looking, as expected with a hotel that old. Yellowing wallpaper, splintering wood floors, dim lighting. The locks on the door were pretty flimsy, and you had to actively yank it shut or it would fall open again. We joked that it looked like the Tower of Terror. After a day of walking around, we came back to get changed. We heard a creaking noise, and I had Coop check under the bed, only half seriously, but I was still relieved that nobody was there. We grabbed a lighter and went out for a smoke, then came back, showered, watched TV for a little while, and then turned out the lights. The moment that we shut the lights off, there was a variety of clicks, creaks, and pops in odd patterns. It being an old room, and us being a logical couple, we figured that it was the old fan or the wall-mounted AC. I was just listening to the noises when I felt Coop freeze up next to me. "Is that you?" I responded no, that it was the AC. "Not that. Seriously, is that you?" I asked him what he meant and waited for a minute or so before asking again and again. Finally, he answered. I was trying to listen, babe. I hear someone breathing. We reasoned that it was the room next door and settled back into our pillows. And then I remembered that there wasn't another room on that side. Our room was the first on the landing, and the side that we were closest to, the side that Coop would have been able to hear, if at all, was the main staircase. Coop, being a 21-year-old boy, is blessed with the ability to fall asleep within seconds. I could hear him snoring, and his legs were over mine, but I was too anxious to sleep. I then felt the lightest tap on top of the quilt, just next to my feet. I froze, but tried to reason with myself that Coop had just twitched in his sleep, although his legs were still on top of mine. A few moments passed and I thought that I had imagined it, and then I felt a pinch/tugging motion at the same area of the quilt. I woke up Coop and demanded that he check under the bed again. I was still reasoning that there was a non-supernatural explanation for the events, and it occurred to me that although we had checked before leaving our walk, we hadn't checked after. The flimsy lock and the fact that the door was difficult to close made it seem likely that someone could have snuck in. Coop was too groggy to be useful, so I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, and leapt as far from the bed as I could while crouching to check what was under it. Nothing. We were both a little freaked out by this point and agreed to turn the TV back on to drown out any weird noises. We turned on Futurama and settled back into bed for the third time. Again, Coop fell asleep within seconds. I was drifting off when I heard the audio on the TV kind of cut somehow. It suddenly shifted tone to where it sounded like a grainy VHS instead of a streaming adult cartoon. I heard a woman saying something about a phantom, and then a blood-curdling scream from the TV. At this point, I was too scared to open my eyes, so I steadied my breathing and pretended to be asleep. That's the last event that I could recall, and upon checking out the next day, the manager asked if we had experienced anything. That's when we Googled the hotel and found out its history of hauntings. So there it is. Nothing too crazy compared to other posts here, but I have definitely never experienced anything like that before and don't have an explanation besides the paranormal. I am a 19-year-old female. When I was 8, right around Valentine's Day, I received one of those small manila envelopes in the mail. It had no return address, but it was sent from another state where I didn't know anyone from. When I opened it, it was simply a folded sheet of computer paper with a picture of Linus from Charlie Brown holding a heart and his blanket. It appeared to be drawn and colored by hand. On the inside was a short Valentine's Day message with a small personal detail about my life that only someone close to me would know. Naturally, I thought it was probably my grandparents or my parents trying to do something nice for me. Every year, it had a picture of Linus, included a detail about my life, was typed in the same font, and was from a different state. For example, the Valentine's Day after I adopted my dog Bailey, the card said, "Would Bailey be jealous if you were my Valentine?" I kept most of these, and managed to find a few as I was rummaging through old, worthless junk. When I got older, I finally mentioned it to my grandparents, fully expecting it to be them, but they swore that they weren't the ones sending the cards. I honestly believe it, because I had expressed my concerns by this point, and they aren't the type that want to scare me. Neither are my parents. The only other family I have in the US are my dad's parents, who don't speak English well and have never owned a computer. They had immigrated here, and there was no way for them to know people in so many states. Aside from my parents and my brother, who found it strange as well, I have no other family. I still get these cards every year, always the same except for one Valentine's Day a few years ago. I received a stuffed teddy bear and a big chocolate heart along with the card. Needless to say, I did not eat the chocolate, and I searched that bear, half convinced that there would be a hidden camera.
After that year, I started just receiving the cards again. In any case, as a child, it was sort of exciting and mysterious, like a secret admirer. Now, it's just unnerving. I have racked my brain for years trying to find out who it could possibly be, and I have come up empty-handed. It still makes me uneasy, but if this person wanted to hurt me, I think that they would have done it by now. I've never felt outwardly threatened by them, so I don't think there's much that I can do about it. I woke up this morning to some disturbing news. My wife and I sleep in different rooms, mainly because I snore a lot and I also toss and turn due to spinal issues. It works out best for us. Lately, I've been going to bed around 4 a.m. since I'm out of a job and I prefer the quiet of the night. My wife usually gets up anywhere between 5 to 6 a.m. if the cats are bugging her to give them a little something until feed time. Don't ask me why, it's just what she does. Anyway, this morning after I woke up, she said as she walked past my room, she saw a shadow figure sitting on the corner of my bed, staring at me, and that my iPod was on. She also said she knew I was sleeping because I was snoring. Now, I usually watch something on my iPad before going to sleep, but I also keep my door mostly closed so that the light from the iPad doesn't disturb her. If she saw me, it means the door was open, as it would have been impossible otherwise. Now that part doesn't disturb me too much. We have 4 cats, and it's not out of the ordinary for them to push the door open. What I know 100% for a fact is that I had the door mostly closed, and the iPad was definitely in sleep mode. I always put my iPad in sleep mode, and then put my phone on the charger prior to going to sleep. My door creaks, so I would have heard it open if I were still up. This is disturbing to me because it isn't the first time a shadow man was spotted by my wife, and I spotted one before meeting her. Back in either 2008 or 2009, I was living in my first apartment. I had the scariest experience of my life. I woke up sleeping on my chest, which I never do, and I found my entire body was paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. Out of the corner of my left eye, I could see a shadow figure approaching me. I tried screaming, but nothing came out. I started to panic, and before I could do anything, everything went blank, and I woke up in the morning. I usually forget most of my dreams, but this event is scared into my brain. The last bit of information I want to share is something that seems odd to me, but I don't really know how to explain it. It's only happened twice in my room over the last 3 years. What I've seen is this strange, tan-colored dust that appears out of nowhere in a small area. The 2 times it happened, it wasn't in the same area, and oddly, the areas around the dust only have the typical normal dust buildup. I've checked the ceiling to see if anything came out from there, and found nothing. It's strange to me because, while I'm not a clean freak, the amount of dust makes it look like it's been building up over months, which, for that, wouldn't be the case. This may have had nothing to do with anything, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I've watched documentaries on sleep paralysis and read some medical reports. I don't know if it is or isn't a medical condition, but what gets me is that people from all over the world with various beliefs have experienced the exact same thing. Always the inability to move one's body, and always a single or multiple shadow figures.
This took place in the summer of 2010. I was with my family and we went down to the USA for vacation that year. We stayed at the hotel we normally stayed at, which was a Red Roof Inn. As we walked in, something felt off about the room, and I thought to myself that it must be just nothing. Over the next few nights, always around 3 in the morning, my mother and I would hear a knocking against the wall. At first we thought, oh, maybe it's just the people next door. However, the room was empty, and we thought nothing of it until it kept happening. I was wondering, could it possibly be haunted? My mother, being super into the paranormal and believing in this as I do myself, we decided to take a statue of the Archangel Michael from my dad's dashboard. It was super small, nothing big, and the next thing you know, we never heard the knocking for the rest of the trip. So it is possible that the room was haunted, and after doing some reading, we think that it could have been a poltergeist. I am on an extended stay at a hotel away from my home for military reasons. The first 2 weeks were fine, but now I've been waking up between 4 and 5 a.m. every night, feeling like someone is watching me from one specific side of the room. Last night it started around 10 p.m. and nearly kept me up all night. I only feel this at my hotel room, not when I go home on my off-duty days. I live on the second floor, so it can't be coming from the window. It is only one specific side of the room, which is a little unsettling. Last night it got so intense that what little sleep that I did get was with the light on. I have a history of sleep paralysis and other sleep issues, but this is something that I have never felt before. I have had multiple experiences with the unexplained and paranormal side of things, but this just seems different. Could this be my own paranoia? I am a security officer and I work in a low-volume hospital. I'm sitting in my office on the computer, and to the left of me is a closet door about 3 feet away. It's a small office. Out of nowhere, there are 2 very loud pounding sounds coming from inside the closet. These were full-on banging sounds, not just knocks. It shook the entire office, it was so violent. I jumped what felt like 10 feet out of my chair. It took me a minute to realize what had just happened before I actually looked inside. Of course, nothing was in there, just some old office equipment. I'm kind of in shock now. I've worked here for a year, and have had some odd stuff happen, but I could always find an explanation in my head. This time, I just can't. We've had reports of odd things happening from the housekeeping and other workers. This happened in 2011. Back then I was very engaged in political activism, and I ended up organizing an Occupy movement in the city I was living in, along with some other fellows. We camped in a downtown square for about 4 months, and throughout this period a lot of people came in and out. By the second month I had to travel to another city where my parents were living for a week. When I came back to the occupation, there was a guy living there that had arrived exactly when I had left. He had somehow already had some respect from other people in a very short period of time. He was tall, blonde, long hair, a bit hippie, had a profound voice that implied self-confidence. He had by some means a strange aura. But okay, no big deal, seemed like a cool guy after a while. Over time he became my friend, and we ended up having long conversations about pretty much everything that interested me and vice versa, like occultism, magic, UFOs, etc., until he brought up the vampirism subject, which I was not familiar with at the time. He explained to me some stuff like that vampires were basically normal people that could manage their own life force, and apparently they have been misinterpreted since always. He told me that there were some secret vampire groups, small ones, that preserved the rituals. There was no blood-sucking thing going on, as he said that blood was an analogy to life force. They were not actually sucking it from people, but they could indeed take somebody's life force. But more important, he said, was to know how to use your own. The conversation finished there. The whole thing seemed fascinating to me, and after a while, we went to sleep. Some days later, here's what happened. My house was quite close to the occupation, and once in a while some of my friends would often ask me to use the bathroom or to have a shower, and then this guy asked me the same. I said yes, no problem at all. Everything went fine, the guy had his shower, and we were walking back to the occupation, and he brought up the subject about vampirism again. This time he was wearing an anonymous plastic mask, which completely covered his face. He starts to explain to me how one can control their own life force inside dreams, and how would that affect the actual material body. Meanwhile, as he's explaining that, I see his jaw making a strange movement, as if there was something stuck between his teeth, and he was trying to clean it. When he finishes the explanation, he calls me by my name and raises the mask slightly so I can take a look at his mouth. And then I saw this huge canine tooth. He pulled the mask back down quickly. I didn't know how to react, so I just remained calm and I asked him what was that for if they didn't actually suck blood from other people. He told me that it worked out as a sort of antenna to capture different vibrations, and he managed to construct it by molding his life force into that shape inside his dreams. He asked me if I would be interested in doing the same. I told him that it sounded interesting, and he just left me to think about it. We arrived at the occupation as if nothing had happened. I didn't see any strange movements by his hands trying to insert a fake tooth into his mouth, or trying to remove it after. The sensation I got was that he pulled the tooth out by a jaw movement. The whole thing was just very strange to digest. I had no idea what to do, so I called my friend and he just said that the whole story sounded too crazy to be believable. We still lived together in the occupation for a while, but I never brought up the subject again. The guide totally noticed my attempt to avoid it, so he didn't push me on it either. There was another strange fact after a while. Once he was shirtless, and crouched organizing some stuff inside of his tent, and the muscles on his back formed into the shape of a winged dragon. The occupation eventually finished, and that guy ended up dating a girl that he met there, and they both had a kid together. He seemed pretty normal, despite those 2 occasions. I can't get this experience out of my head, no matter how many years have passed. This happened way back in the early 2000s. I was in the 8th grade and we were on a trip. I stayed in a hotel with 2 other girls. One of them was my friend and another girl who we were just somewhat acquainted with. The first night in the room, during my shower, I felt like someone was behind me, like standing really close to my back under the shower spray. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. So I continued showering, but the feeling just got worse. When I finished my shower, I pulled open the curtain, and when I looked up at the gigantic wall mirror, I saw a grotesque face behind my right shoulder. It was gone within seconds. I think I stood frozen there for a whole minute before I practically ran out, screaming. The next day, we were getting ready to go out. The girl we roomed with said that someone was in our room last night. She heard the toilet flush, the sink turn on, but then nothing. No one entered the room. No one left. And no one else but us was in there to begin with. We know because we checked every nook and cranny after she told us. The second night, when we got back to our hotel room, I suddenly felt super sleepy, like I literally fell to the floor once I stepped inside.
It was odd because I wasn't sleepy at all until we actually walked into the room. The other two couldn't move me since I had an extra 50 pounds on them, so they just covered me up with the blanket, put a pillow under my head, and left me there. Then my friend said that sometime during the night I had gotten up, used the bathroom, and crawled into the bed. But I don't remember doing that. In fact, when I woke up on the third day, I was still on the floor.
This happened about 3 years ago, but has really affected how I think about ghosts and the paranormal ever since. When I tell my friends, some of them find it very creepy, while others say they don't believe in any supernatural things, and while it is odd, they feel there must be some other explanation. I took a family vacation, me, my parents, and 2 siblings, over Christmas. All of us were already adults at this time, and while my family is agnostic and holds out judgment for the afterlife, none of us are religious or believe that there is a true afterlife with heaven or hell. That said, my parents thought it would be fun for us to stay at a haunted hotel in Jerome, Arizona on our way to a resort town further down the road. This whole town is supposedly haunted, but especially the hotel, which used to be a mental hospital that has long since been converted. We checked in, and were given 2 of the most supposedly haunted suites because we needed 2 large adjoining rooms for everyone to fit. So far, everything was normal, until we got to the room. My mom and sisters suddenly smelled something they described as putrid in a spot in one of our rooms. I couldn't smell it, so dismissed it and moved on. We took a walk around the town, and I asked a bakery owner about the haunted stories, and she said it's just accepted that sometimes things fly off her shelves at home, but nothing hostile. Here is where the weird stuff starts. We signed up for the nighttime tour of the hotel in a largish group of people, and we were all given electromagnetic readers while we walked around and heard the stories of the mental patients that died there. Halfway through the tour, my dad and sister hear a sound and turn around to see the doorknob of the room next to them shaking and rattling incessantly. I didn't personally see it, so by this time I was getting bored. I always thought it would be cool if ghosts existed, but didn't really believe they can do anything to affect the physical world. I asked my sister to take some Instagram pictures of me in a cool-looking couch in one of the haunted suites, and she took some quick shots. I passed my hand over the table in front of me to pose, when I felt an extremely cold, chilling sensation in my hand and wrist, and told her to stop. When I looked at the photos, I was shocked. I have a series of 3 pictures where you can see that I'm switching around with a startled look on my face, shaking my hand, and there is a white cloud streaking through my hand and wrist in the photos that appears and disappears throughout the 3 frames. Needless to say, I was frightened. I was no longer willing to sleep on my own, so I took to bed with my mom. Yeah, sad, I know. My dad and sister slept a bit and went to walk around in the middle of the night in the boiler room where they said they had felt some weird stuff. I don't remember exactly what happened, but one of them felt a strong chill on their back. Meanwhile, I was sleeping and my mom suddenly woke and slammed her hand on the dresser. She said sorry and went back to sleep. She's never been a sleep mover, but whatever. I slept pretty deeply that night, but I kept being woken up by a super loud, clanking, rattling sound in the halls that sounded like the gurneys being wheeled back and forth. This is not a busy hotel, and in the middle of the desert. In the morning, my mom said she had a dream that there was a little boy and a young nurse talking to him. Then the nurse aged and became mean and scowling, and raised her hand to hit the boy. She said she then heard a voice telling her to hit him herself. This is why she hit the dresser. Keep in mind that this was a mental hospital, and one of the ghosts there is supposed to be a little boy, but no one knows why or how he died. So I'm a week out of the hospital after spending 2 weeks in there with COVID-19 and pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues, and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. She left to get a new tube for the drip, and whilst she did that, I rolled over in my bed and saw an elderly man standing at the end of my bed with his hand on the bed at the bottom, as he was looking out the window. Initially, I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same ward, wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times, as they all had dementia or delirium, so I spoke to him and asked him if he was alright, but he didn't respond. I buzzed for the nurse and she came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes, and I believe before the nurse's too, as she stopped and stared for a moment, before shaking her head and continuing. I tried asking about it, but she kept telling me that I must be dreaming. Every time she came back into my room, she looked at the same spot where he had been. I'm not sure what I actually did see that night, and I didn't recognize the man at all. I was raised to understand and live in harmony with the paranormal. There were a lot of spirits and odd happenings surrounding me when I was younger. I've never really liked being alone in the dark, but I don't remember being afraid of anything supernatural until one night. I was about 13, and we had recently moved into my aunt's old house. I immediately disliked the house, and especially my room. They just felt wrong. Still, we set everything up. We put my 4-poster bed against the wall in such a way that my headboard was in a corner, and my footboard sat right against the light switch. So, if I laid on my bed and looked down, I saw the light switch, doorway, and top of the footboard. I had a big window to my right, with a street light just outside it. My bedroom door wouldn't close, and the hallway light stayed on. Anyway, I started to see shadowy figures during the day and night, but that was pretty normal. I woke up a few nights to tiny footsteps and cackling. I assumed they were goblins being annoying. I always felt watched. The first night something seemed wrong, I woke up hanging halfway off of my bed. I couldn't see any light or figure out how I was even laying. Finally, I found my footboard. I reached out much further than the switch should have been and turned on the bedroom light. As soon as I touched the switch, I could see the street and hallway lights again. About 2 nights later, I woke up just in time to see a dark figure appear over my footboard. It looked like a man's head and shoulders with thick black material draped over it. There were no facial features, and the blackness continued like it had a body, but no arms or anything. When I think back, it reminds me of the Dementors from Harry Potter, but it slithered up over my footboard. I could feel the weight, and I could move, but it seemed like a bad idea. So I closed my eyes. I felt the weight continue up to my chest, pause, and disappear. I opened my eyes, and it was gone. I felt strangely better in the house after that, and I haven't seen it since. It was still one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I don't know what it was, or who it was looking for. This happened February 14th, Valentine's Day. Me and 2 of my friends decided that we would get a cheap hotel room and take some LSD to kick off the loneliest holiday ever. I've done it before, but was not in a good mindset to take it that night, so I settled for a bottle of wine. Anyway, we weren't familiar with the area of the hotel, but it was cheap, and that's all that mattered to us.
It was around 3 in the morning, and outside the door we hear someone stumbling around, bumping into the walls. But it was Valentine's Day anyway, so we just brushed it off as a drunk couple on their way to get it on. The stumbling stopped and went silent right outside of our door. My friends are tripping at this point, and I'm pretty drunk. We hear this woman start sobbing outside, and I'm assuming that she sat down with her back on our door because we heard her slide down the wall and collapse right on the other side. The woman starts trying to speak to us through the cracks of the door, saying that she lost her dogs and was wondering if we could help her. It was 3 a.m., and we didn't know anything about the area, like I said, so common sense would dictate don't respond. And we didn't. The woman then proceeds to bang on the door, saying that we stole her dogs, and that she's gonna come in and quote-unquote effing murder us. She was scratching and banging on the door for 10 minutes straight, and then just stopped. My friends were starting to have a bad trip because of her, but when she stopped, I tried to reassure them that she was gone, and that they could go back to having a good time. To prove it to my friends, I checked through the peephole to verify that this woman was indeed gone. But there she was, trying to stare right back at me through the other side of the peephole. I watched her as she stepped back and stood there, as still and solid as a literal concrete statue. She had her eyes right on mine. I doubt that she could see me through the peephole, but I was making dead eye contact with her. The woman then proceeds to start screaming and throwing her body against the door, which thankfully woke up our neighbors and they called the front desk. The woman behind the front desk comes and tries to get this woman to leave. The woman left, but was going down the walkways of the hotel being loud and refusing to actually leave the property. She was still crying out for her lost dogs in the hotel hallway at 3 a.m. They said that they never saw her leave, and implied that she was still inside, so they just told me to keep an eye out for her and call the front desk if anything else happened. The police were called, and stayed posted outside the hotel for an extra 30 minutes, and then left. It turns out that she was on some really heavy drugs. But still, hearing this woman throw her body onto the door, saying that she would kill us, was incredibly traumatizing. We left early that morning, and never went back. When I was around 12, maybe 13 years old, I'm 24 now, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. We watched movies and ate junk food, a usual occurrence when I got to see him. My brother was also usually with us, but this time he was staying with a friend that night. I decided it was time for bed around 11 that evening. I went for my routine, getting ready for bed. He decided that it was time for bed around 11 that evening, and I went about my usual routine, getting ready for sleep. I laid down and tried to pass out. I was restless this night for some reason, just feeling completely uneasy. My bed used to be vertical to the door with my feet closest to the door. I always used to sleep with my door open. I guess it gave me some comfort being able to see half of the entrance to my dad's door, knowing that he wasn't far away. Anyway, as I said, I just couldn't get to sleep, and frustrated, I laid there staring at my ceiling for a moment, and then felt as if someone were watching me. I shifted my eyes to the doorway, and a pitch-black figure was standing there, its head almost touching the top of the frame. I've never had an issue with sleep paralysis, and never have had it since, but then, in that moment, I could not move. All I could do was look at this tall figure that stood there, staring at me. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and my heart felt as if it were going to beat out of my chest. I managed to barely whisper, "Dad?" And it turned its head sideways at me as if it were confused. I began hyperventilating intensely, which must have woken my dad because he came running into my room, and as he came through the door, the figure dissolved, as if a breeze came by, and it went away with it. My dad held me as I cried.
I slept in his room that night, and for the rest of my stay there until I went back to my mom's. This event shook me to my core, and to this day, I cannot and will not sleep with an open door. I still have a deep feeling of fear, and almost want to cry when I picture that thing, and remember that night. A few nights ago, I awoke to being restrained by what I can only describe as a vampire. I'm familiar with the paranormal, but this was a particularly impressive experience. I was pinned to my bed, trapped underneath the body of a young woman. It was as if she was trying to bite me, but at the same time doing everything in her power to stop herself. Or she was doing her best to bite me, but something was preventing her from being able to. She was struggling and jerking, breathing rapidly and kind of growling and snorting. The way she was moving, it was almost as if she was on fast forward. Her teeth were grazing my neck with her mouth wide open. I could feel them against my skin, but was sure that they never penetrated. I was unable to break free and struggled in fear, but realized that I couldn't get away, so just gave in and embraced her. When I embraced her, I found that I actually felt an overwhelming love, despite the disturbing nature of the experience. I had a very clear image of what she looked like. She had long, wavy hair, and somehow resembled myself. I could also feel her intention. Even though she was doing something violent, it was clear to me that she was good at heart. Eventually, because I was alternatively struggling against her, I did break free, and she disappeared. I had a similar experience to this around a year ago, where I awoke to a dark, humanoid shadow being standing beside me, manipulating my energy. That being, however, I felt was inherently evil. This vampiric entity, on the other hand, didn't give off a sinister vibe. It just seemed to me that she was trapped in some kind of karma, unable to control herself. I know about the sleep paralysis demon phenomenon, and that there is supposed to be logical explanation for these occurrences. Honestly, I completely disbelieved in anything supernatural for most of my life. After everything I've experienced, though, it's impossible to deny that these kinds of things are real. I've had a few unexplained experiences over the decades, but the Gold Hill Hotel is my favorite spooky tale. I was staying the weekend at the hotel with friends and my then boyfriend. It was a really memorable weekend because it was the Christmas holiday season and the hotel was decked out. We were all drinking and it was quite festive. There was a female jazz singer from San Francisco who was staying at the hotel and who played carols on the piano. My boyfriend went up to the room before me and passed out drunk in the bed. I followed not long after. Later that night, I awoke suddenly to someone jerking the blankets off of me. It was the force of the jerk on the blankets that woke me up. I immediately looked over at my snoring, drunk boyfriend sleeping on his side, and then down at the blankets themselves. They had been pulled down to my waist, and down off of him. I slowly pulled them back up and curled up next to him. I slept very little the rest of the night. The next day, I asked him if he recalled anything unusual, but he didn't, and poo-pooed my experience. Later, I found out that we were staying in one of the rooms that visitors commonly reported having blankets pulled off of them. I can't recall the specifics of the ghost that actually haunts the room, but I sure do remember that moment when the blankets were laying down below my waist and pulled off of my boyfriend, and realizing that maybe we weren't alone in our room. Before I begin my story, I'll give you a quick summary of the location where this happened. At my middle school, in the other half of the building built in the 1950s at some point. All the classrooms have little windows next to them. My reason for bringing this up is a horrifying event that took place during my 5th class today involving one of these said windows. I walked into the classroom and set my stuff down, preparing to ask the boy next to me named Cameron if he had a pencil. As I was about to open my mouth, I heard a loud smacking sound followed by a crunch, followed by a shattering type noise. Sort of like when you drop a box of pencils or markers. All of a sudden, I was deafened by screams of shock and agony. My classmates were now in the hall, shocked by something just barely out of my line of sight. I walked into the hallway with them. Being on the shorter end of the height spectrum, I had to shove my way to the front of the group. What I saw next will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I saw a girl rolling around on the floor, smearing blood on the dirty linoleum tiles. At first I couldn't tell what happened, but I got the picture after a few seconds. This girl was a special needs student. After being rejected by a boy in her class, she went completely ballistic and without thinking had punched one of the windows next to a neighboring classroom's door. There was broken glass and blood everywhere. Thankfully, the classroom next to ours is vacant, and no one was in there at the time of the incident. After about 10 minutes, teachers got the situation calmed down. The girl was completely insane and tried to fight the man who came to help her. The school ended up going into a lockdown. She had to go to the hospital, and even though no one really knew her, we were all in legitimate shock by the horrible scene. I really hope that she's getting the help she needs, and hope that she doesn't have a fistful of glass shards. I've seen some really crazy things at my school, but that might have been the most messed up thing I've ever witnessed. Last night I was turning off all of the lights and getting ready for bed. I just had my flashlight from my phone to do some tidying up in the kitchen. I turn it off and go walk into the bedroom. Across from the kitchen, in the living room, there is a shadow. This was something that was different from the usual, as it clearly caught my attention. It was something that looked like a long shape peering in from the upper right side of the window, as if it was a long neck or just some weird shape, definitely abnormal. I was genuinely afraid, and kept turning the lights on and off to see when I could see it. It was only when it was completely black inside, and the street light and neighbor's porch lights were slightly illuminating the window. I tried to look out, but could only see myself in the blinds, and it really freaked me out. So I left the lamp by the window on, and after debating, I told myself not to wake my partner up because realistically it's nothing, and what could it be? I mean, we're on the 2nd floor. It seemed really close to the window, and it wasn't moving. I'm not one to believe in paranormal activities. In fact, every time I watch scary YouTube videos that claim to be true and have paranormal shadows or movements, I instantly think it's not true and get annoyed. Walking tonight with my partner, I remembered the situation from last night. I saw nothing on the outside that would show through the window and create the shape that I saw. I quickly went inside with him to see what I could see from the inside with all the lights out again. I was expecting to see it there, and that it was something that I just never noticed before. But it was gone. The window looks completely normal, and the lights outside are the same as they always are. I'll never know what it was. And next time, I will definitely be waking up my partner if I see it. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettal, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I had walked into a wall of, I'm not sure what to call it, bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues, other than just waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air were crushing her. That unnerved me even more, just knowing that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented into my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet toward the end of my bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned toward what had grabbed me, a huge, looming black shape was visible in the darkness, as if a man were in there with me. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there been nothing there. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night, terrified. The next morning, we were at breakfast, and my sister mentioned that she was also up half the night, because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything else, but it still freaks me out. Earlier today, I think I might have seen something, but I don't know. This happened a few hours ago while I was outside mowing my lawn. Quick layout of my yard. When you walk down my driveway toward the street, if you look to the left, you'll see a dead end, and if you look to the right, you'll see a big tree that you couldn't see through. This is relevant. Now, on to what happened. I was mowing the lawn inside my fence, and when I finished that, I went over to the part of my yard that was outside of my fence. After I finished mowing, I looked to the right and saw a pair of legs on the other side of the tree. All I saw was legs, because I couldn't see the person through the trees. But their legs were all black. Like I couldn't make out any features. I couldn't see any pants or shoes. It was just all pitch black. I'm confused, and so I try walking around the tree to see who it was, but whatever it was ran away. It only took me 2 seconds to get to the other side, but as I said, whatever it was gone. I live on the corner of my block, so there's nowhere that a person could have hidden that fast. I've never believed in the paranormal or had any sort of experience, but I really can't explain what happened. Anyone who's had a similar experience and could possibly give me an explanation, I would appreciate it, because I'm still confused. I work at the front desk of a hotel, and within the last 6 months, we had a guest that passed away in one of our rooms. Because of this pandemic, my boss has blocked off the room, even after deep cleaning, just to be safe. Due to the hotel business not doing well, he also had a couple of rooms cut off from power, which means that none of the electronics are working for those rooms. Now, our hotel has 2 phones up at the front, one for external calls and the other specifically for internal lines, which are only connected to the phones in each guest room. I was having a quiet day during my shift alone. Business isn't running as normal, and all the housekeepers had left for the day, and the only staff there was the maintenance guy and I. I get an internal phone call from one of the rooms and answer it as I usually do, and it's just static noises, along with an occasional cut-in between, like the noise that you get when you unplug your headphones from a device. I didn't think anything of it at first, and thought that it was a guest accidentally calling the front desk, so I waited a little bit to hang up. Then I realized that the call was from the same room where the guest had passed away, and that there was no way a call could be made from that room because the phone was unplugged. I was a little bit spooked, so I asked the maintenance guy, who was just chilling in the back office, to go and check out the room and make sure that the power was still out. He comes back and sure enough the phone is still unplugged, and he even took a picture of it. He also has a log of what rooms have power, electronics, etc. We even checked the lobby cameras to make sure that no one had gone into the rooms, and there was nothing. No housekeepers went in or out of the room at all within the past week. Just as we were done checking the camera footage, I received another call from that same exact room. And this time it was silent for a good 10 seconds or so, and then the same static noise, but this time much louder. I hung up the phone so fast, a guest asked if everything was okay. I didn't tell her. I tried to think of every scientific possible way that this could have been an internal mistake, such as an outside sales call accidentally getting caught within our internal call system, but that's just impossible to begin with, especially if the phone cord was not plugged in. A couple of years ago, I worked at a hospital as security, and part of security duties for the second shift was to lock all doors downstairs in the basement of the hospital. The type of things down there ranged from offices, supply rooms, bathrooms, and the morgue. We would also have to check the refrigeration temp inside the morgue to make sure it was running properly, but that's not important. So one night I go down to the basement, which is basically a big rectangle, locked all the doors, and just as I was going to make a right to take the stairs up, I noticed someone walk out of the corner in what looked like blue scrubs. They took about 5 steps into one of the doors I had locked. They didn't open the door or anything, just walked right through. As security, I couldn't just brush it off because recently we had people steal from the supply room, so I had to check it out, especially since it was after hours. As I walked up to the door, I immediately got goosebumps because this specific door was 1, an automatic locking door that can only be accessed by ID clearance, and 2, I didn't see the individual pull out an ID, which you have to get in. You pull out the ID, scan, and wait for the green light to pop up to open the door. I literally just saw someone take about 5 steps into the door like it was open wide, which it wasn't. The door automatically locks and closes itself. I think to myself, well, if someone accessed the door after hours, they aren't allowed to, so this might be the person that's stealing stuff. If a nurse or someone needs to go to the supply room, they call security, and security escorts them because of stealing incidents. So I pull out my ID, scan it, and open the door. I walked in and saw nobody. Then I opened all the closet doors to confirm that nobody was hiding, and then immediately got the F out, because I was 100% sure that I had just seen a ghost. Later that night, I got a call from the ER department to escort a nurse down to the supply room. When I escorted her down there, into the supply room and told her what I had seen, she shuffled through some boxes in the supply room and pulled out the same exact blue scrubs that I had seen the ghost wearing. Except they weren't scrubs. They were the blue gowns that patients wear inside the hospital. So what I had actually seen that night was a patient's ghost walking around the basement. After this experience, I definitely believe in ghosts and the afterlife. To this day, I kick myself for not looking at the cameras that night. This is a story that my grandma told me, so it may not be 100% accurate, but I'll try and tell it the best that I can. More than 70 years ago, sorry for not knowing the exact timeline, my great-grandfather died of a heart attack. He was, of course, buried like any other person. Here we have a tradition that every 5 years we lift the remains of the deceased, and the family can decide if they should put the body somewhere else or leave it there. This is mostly due to the empty spaces in the graveyard if the deceased doesn't have any family. So they raised my great-grandfather's remains, but the weird thing was that he had not decomposed. He looked exactly as if he had just been buried. After 5 more years had passed, they went to lift his remains again, but this time, the coffin was empty. This is not how the story ends. 10 years after all this happened, my aunt, that was 8 at the time, was home alone one day, and she heard a strange noise in the house, so she went to investigate. In the kitchen there was a strange man who looked at her and said, "Don't be scared. I just came to see my first granddaughter." And then he disappeared. Later that day she told her parents, and after describing the man, they went to get an old photo album, and she identified my great-granddad. When my grandmother tells this story, she tends to omit the last part that my aunt told me. According to my grandmother, the priest probably sold my great-grandfather's corpse because it wasn't decomposing, and she says that my aunt is lying about having seen him. This happened many years ago, so I don't remember many details, but the experience still feels vivid. It is important to be mentioned that the bedroom where I was has a view to the backyard and the kitchen. So, my story took place at my previous home when I was 10. I was alone with my sister, who was 4 at the time, but later my parents came home after Mass. The TV was on and showing a comedy program, but I wasn't very interested. After some time, I noticed what I thought was a person in the corner of my eye. But at a second glance, I realized it wasn't exactly a person. It was a child with curly hair. The silhouette resembled that, and my reaction was nothing but freak out. I was losing my mind, thinking about going to find out what it was or call someone. My sister was sleeping, so she didn't know about it until I told my parents. After some minutes, I managed to calm myself down and wait in that room until my parents came home. Nobody believed me at that moment. And during those years, we didn't have any cameras or smartphones. Some years later, I found out about shadow people, and my experience fits with the stories told. I don't know what to think about that, but always remember that day, even after I moved out. I worked at Hotel del Coronado, opened in 1888, on overnight shifts very often. We have historic pictures all over the walls of Babe Ruth, Roosevelt, Marilyn Monroe, etc. My overnight manager kept a tiny red notebook next to him every shift. Every strange occurrence that would take place would be noted. We have obnoxious ghost tours with crappy unreal stories going on all the time, but in reality they could have just asked the night crew for some tales. We would have some items turn on and off, which was normal with old wiring. We would receive creepy phone calls. People would see figures that would disappear and hear things when no one was there. Bellmen would find children's handprints littered all over windows and mirrors when they have not seen a child all day. But one story stuck out from the others. The overnight manager was doing his laps around the halls as he does every night. Some were curved sharp, where you couldn't see what was on the other side. It was around 3 a.m., of course, when a hooded, dark figure darted far ahead across his path. He shouted and scurried quickly. He turned the tight corner to find an empty hallway and a room door. No sign. It was just open. My manager sat, puzzled, thinking of how he had never entered that room and was curious of the layout of it. In hospitality, you must be able to describe every inch of the rooms. He wandered back to his office and scrolled through the room numbers, finally stumbling onto the one from earlier. Then he sat in shock when he discovered the room's snapshots. The first picture in the layout file was of himself on his first day of work. My boyfriend and I decided to take an impromptu trip to Gettysburg and booked a decently priced hotel the night before. The first night I fell asleep no problem, but the second night, not so much. He had already gone to bed, and I had just shut the light off. As soon as the light was out, I could hear paper or bags shuffling around on our TV stand, and I thought that he had gotten up to look for something. I looked up, and of course no one was there, but I instantly felt terrified and felt the presence of someone standing at the foot of our bed. It only lasted about a minute or so, and then suddenly there was a loud bang, like a door being slammed in the room above us, and the feeling disappeared. When we got home, my boyfriend, who doesn't believe in the supernatural at all, extremely reluctantly brought up how the first night that we stayed, he got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and immediately got creeped out and thought that someone was in our room. He went into the bathroom and felt like someone was standing directly behind him. Of course, Gettysburg has tons of history, but after doing some research, I haven't found much information about the hotel or what may have been there before. Whatever happened in our room didn't feel harmless, though. Back in the early 2000s when I was a kid, there was a deserted section of the local hospital waiting to be torn down and rebuilt. My friends and I thought that it would be a fantastic idea to climb onto the roof and practice our parkour skills. After about 30 minutes, one of my friends stood on a skylight and it gave out from under him. He only just managed to grab onto the ledge, which stopped him from falling in. Myself and my other friend then rushed over and grabbed his hands to start pulling him up when we noticed a little girl standing on a chair directly in the moonlight, looking up and waving. We pulled our friend to safety and quickly looked back over the side to find that the little girl was gone and the chair was on its side. We all left pretty quickly after that. All of us were shocked. We later discovered that that part of the hospital was used to treat burn victims, and a 6-year-old girl had once died there. I should start by saying that I am sensitive, but have never known about or tried any of my abilities to sense the paranormal. I recently stayed at the Stanley Hotel in New York. After pulling onto the property, I immediately felt extremely uneasy and had a sense of dread. Just an overall bad feeling about the place. After entering the building, I started feeling nauseous and lightheaded like I was going to pass out, and weird stabbing pains were all around my head. Not a normal headache. As the night progressed, I started getting flashing images in my head depicting horrible, violent, graphic scenes of myself being stabbed and choked, and figures who were standing over me. I felt as if I weren't alone in my own head. I felt random bursts of anger and sadness and would want to either hurt the people that I was with, or just start hysterically crying. I have never felt so out of control, like my head was in a fog, and everything that was happening was a dream, like I was there in my head, but I couldn't control my body. It has been 5 days since I left, and I still don't feel like myself. What happened to me in that hotel? At first, I thought she was on drugs. But then she did something that made me wonder if she was telling the truth. I was 16. A friend and I were walking through a local park at night when we saw this Asian woman wearing what looked like a traditional Chinese dress. She was dancing alone in the grass, and she then started running toward us, scared the crap out of me, and began telling us how handsome that we were. This woman appeared to be in her mid to late 20s, and honestly, she was stunningly beautiful. She kept telling us that she was a vampire, and that she was centuries old. I was thinking, okay, she's obviously on something, or she's crazy. But then she gazes into my eyes and says, "Do you want to feel my energy?" I said sure, and she then placed her hand a few inches from my face. The amount of energy or whatever it was that came from her hand caused my entire skull to vibrate and made me extremely dizzy. I have no idea what that could have been. I have never seen her again to this day, but I often think about it. I'm 23 now. I tried researching Asian myths and legends, trying to discover some kind of spirit or demon common to a specific culture that resembles her. Could anyone tell me what this apparition was, or if she was just a crazy woman with psychic abilities? My boyfriend and I were big fans of nautical history, so we decided to spend our Valentine's Day in 2007 on the Queen Mary. As I'm sure most of you are aware, it's reported to be haunted. That was also the kind of thing that appealed to us, but mostly we have BAs in European history, so it was just cool in general. Anyhow, we got a historical suite, meaning that it was mostly like it had been when the ship was commissioned aside from an old TV. The first night, Valentine's Day night, when we stayed there, we both woke up to what sounded like the drawers of the built-in dresser being opened and slammed shut repeatedly. We're both not the types to freak out and run, but I can't really say why we were both so low-key that we just acknowledged that the other was okay and eventually went back to sleep. Mainly because it was truly alarming at the time. Maybe we just trusted that if we were both okay, that everything else was okay? I really don't know. But then, we didn't know the history about the room. The next day, we went on the ghost tour. Turns out that we were sleeping in the second most haunted room on the ship. The room next door was Churchill's suite, where he planned battles during World War II. While we didn't experience the cigar smell that many have reported while staying in that room, it was still interesting that without knowing our room was known to have paranormal events happen, we did have an experience. We had some really weird camera malfunctions in the engine room, as well as creepy, aggressive feelings in an old museum room on the ship, which we only found because we tried to get into every unlocked room that there was. It honestly felt like someone was creeping up behind our backs. But again, just feelings, so shrug. Anyway, that's my Valentine's Day ghost story. Last night I was laying in bed trying to sleep. My room is already a nice, cool temperature due to my air conditioner. However, it feels as though out of nowhere the temperature drops 10 more degrees. I find this a bit strange, but I don't really mind it. Then suddenly, I feel what I think is a touch. Like something is touching me around my neck and chest, as well as pressure building on those areas. I simply try not to ignore it and go to sleep. The cold and sensations of touch are a mere annoyance at this point, but that's when I saw it. I looked over my bed to the door, and there it was. A large, lanky shadow figure standing there with yellow eyes. It was only there for a second, but it still managed to scare me. Luckily, I was able to sleep, and as a precaution, I now have a bowl of salt in my room, as I hear it repels evil spirits and possibly demons. I woke up in bed, and next to me I could see a man lying there with no distinctive facial features except for brown, darkish hair. He got up and moved to the side of my hospital bed and sat in front of me. He said to me, "You're going to die soon." I asked when, but he didn't respond, and I got up and locked myself in the bathroom. I've still never figured out what they meant or who they were. I wasn't on any medication that would bring on any hallucinations or anything like this, but this has not happened before or since.